Xtalks connects professionals in the life science, medical device, and food industries with useful content like webinars, job openings, articles, and virtual meetings to help you succeed in your career. This food industry-focused podcast brings together some of our editorial staff to share insights into the latest B2B industry news to help keep you up to date. This week on the show, we're discussing how companies can protect against a food cyber attack and why the UK is facing a tomato shortage. Enjoy the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 100th episode of the Xtalks Food Podcast. Woo! We've reached 100 episodes. Very, very exciting. As always, I'm Sydney Perlmutter, Senior Food Industry Journalist and Webinar Moderator at xtalks.com. And this week, I'm joined by Vera Kovacevic and Sarah Hand. Thank you for coming today to our 100th episodes. What we're going to do real quick first is we're going to start off by just going around and talking about our favorite episodes thus far. So for me, it'll be a more recent one, which was the 3 food and beverage industry trends for 2023. And I think why this one was my favorite is just because we spoke to 2 really, interesting food industry experts, and they told us a lot about, what they saw over the last year, and what they predicted for this coming year. And I think why I really liked it as well is because we've been doing this podcast for so long, and it really showed a lot of the progress over the last few years. And as always, it's just great to hear from experts. So yeah, I predict that these food industry trend podcasts will continue being my favorites, just because there's so much ground to cover, and I love talking to people. So Sarah, how about you tell me about yours?
Yeah, thanks, Sydney. And congratulations to us all, I guess, for reaching 100 episodes. Of course, thanks to our listeners as well. I am going to really go back to our second podcast episode. So that was from March of 2021, so 2 years ago. And in this episode, we talked about Slate chocolate milk, which just was really interesting to me because it was basically chocolate milk for grown-ups, chocolate milk for adults. And so what they did is they took chocolate milk and kind of made a healthier for you version. Definitely something we talk about a lot on this podcast. So they made it, fewer calories, less sugar, and more protein. And they also made dark chocolate milk and espresso chocolate milk. I just thought that was, a really interesting concept, and a lot of the branding, their packaging is very much like, this is for grown-ups. So I thought that was super interesting. And we'll be linking all of these episodes in our show notes if any of our listeners want to check them out. The other thing we talked about in this podcast, a real 180 was Aunt Jemima rebranding to Pearl Milling Company. So, that was 2 years ago now. I think we all said at the time felt kind of overdue to do this rebrand, and but certainly, good. They were finally doing it. Uncle Ben was kind of another one that they were changing as well. So it was a cool episode, only our second one. So I'm sure, we all sound a little bit different 2 years on, but would definitely recommend people go back and listen to that one. Vera, what about you? What's your favorite?
Well, I have many favorites. Like Sydney always brings these new and interesting topics. But I would say the one that was really memorable to me was episode 73. And we released that on August 18th of last year, 2022. And during that episode, Sydney talked about what we should know about food clinical trials. And I feel like so many people know about, the pharma or medical device clinical trials, but I feel like not many people are aware that food clinical trials even exist. So she explained what they are and why they could be useful for the food industry. So for example, Sydney discussed how they're very beneficial to evaluate specific marketing claims that need some scientific evidence, right? So if someone says, for example, this food product is going to be XYZ better for your health, it's good if they actually have a food clinical trial that backs up that claim. Otherwise, like, the claims would be, without evidence, right? And that's a big problem in the food industry. So yeah, food clinical trials, really interesting. And after that, the team also talked about how, like, there's so much we don't understand about nutrition, and, like, perhaps food clinical trials can, like, improve our understanding. And then the other thing Sydney talked about in that episode was about, like, food packaging. So specifically, she talked about a type of cheese called
Baby Bell?
Baby Bell, okay. So yeah, Baby Bell cheese and other food products, like why they're wrapped in wax. And something that I still remember is, like, Sydney told me how some apples in the grocery store also have, like, a thin coating of wax, and I didn't even know that. So really interesting.
Wash your fruit, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. So yeah, that was my favorite.
Thank you for sharing your favorites. And like Sarah said, we'll be linking those episodes in our notes. So feel free to give all those a listen. So for today's show, though, I'll jump right in and I'll talk about the latest shortage that the UK is facing, and that would be tomatoes. So last year we saw, a lot of food shortages. We had a turkey shortage, the beverage Topo Chico, coffee, baby formula, even lettuce as well. And now we're only starting to see them sort of be replenished. But unfortunately, the new year has brought with it a new set of supply chain challenges, including this most recent tomato shortage in the UK. And of course, as with any food shortages, the rare supply that does remain on grocery shelves has shot up in price. So according to the UK Office for National Statistics, tomato prices reached $2.96 per kilogram, 296 pounds, which in US dollars is around $3.53 in January 2023, up 22.3% since the same time last year. And as a result, pictures have been circulating of empty produce shelves, and food service businesses have had to settle for reduced deliveries as wholesalers try to spread out the limited supply. So for some restaurants, this has meant tomato-less pizzas and salads, and some grocery stores have introduced a temporary limit for purchases of tomatoes. So since no food shortage occurs at random, here are some of the causes for the UK's tomato shortage. Now, the main one, to no one's surprise, it would be weather. So in Morocco, which is one of the UK's leading tomato producers, growers and suppliers have had to contend with cold temperatures, a lack of sunlight, heavy rain, flooding, and canceled ferries over the past month, all of which have seriously affected the volume of tomatoes that reached the UK. And according to two Moroccan associations of vegetable producers, exporters, and packers, the growing season in Morocco has been marked by a long period of cold, which was followed by abnormally high temperatures. And as a consequence, the daily tomato harvest dropped sharply, resulting in shortening the supply capacity of packing stations and provisions of the local Moroccan market, as well as markets abroad. Now, tomato supply from the UK's other major exporter, Spain, has also been affected by fluctuating unpredictable weather. Tomato volumes from Almeria, Spain, were down 22% in February 2023 compared to the same time last year. The UK is particularly reliant on both Spain and Morocco, which earlier last month barred exports of tomatoes, onions, and potatoes to West African countries to reduce domestic prices and protect exports to Europe. So, essentially poor weather. And now the second reason it would be high energy costs. So the tomato shortage is also exacerbated by less winter production in greenhouses in the UK and elsewhere due to high energy costs. And many growers didn't even, start crops in the fall due to rising electricity costs that made it commercially unviable. And both Lee Valley Growers Association and Flynn's Tomatoes, two of the top tomato producers in Britain and Ireland respectively, delayed planting crops this year because they couldn't afford to heat their greenhouses. Energy-intensive industries like tomato production have seen their energy costs soar over the past year after the Russian invasion of Ukraine sparked a rally in energy commodities and power prices. But despite some government support, high energy costs could continue to threaten UK tomato producers. So these are the two main reasons, that take the brunt of the blame for the tomato shortage. But there are other factors, including fluctuating labor costs and shortages, British supermarkets habitually underpaying their suppliers, and anecdotally Brexit and just all the, all that caused in terms of exporting and not being a part of Europe anymore. However, there are reasons to be optimistic, though. The British Retail Consortium said that it predicts the tomato shortage will only last a few weeks until the UK growing season begins and supermarkets find alternative sources of supply, according to the BBC. So as I was writing this, I mean, we've talked about other shortages on the show recently, an egg shortage as well, which was really, really big and still sort of continues to be an issue. But it really just made me think about how, we're as consumers, we're just seeing the end of the supply chain. And there are so many factors that go into, foods getting from point A to B to C to D to, in our homes, in our stomachs. Like there's so many different factors and as normal consumers, we don't really think about them. And I know we talked about this on the egg shortage podcast, but I like to know why there is a shortage. Like the reason really helps you to sort of like wrap your head around it and not just blame it on inflation, right? So, I want to know what you guys think about this shortage. And like, if you saw, for example, if you go to the store looking specifically for tomatoes and you didn't see them, like as a consumer, what would your reaction be? And what do you think like people's reactions are when they see a shortage or notice that there's like an ongoing shortage going on?
Yeah, tomatoes, technically they're a fruit, right? But we think of them as a vegetable. But like,
right.
Yeah, I've always seen them in abundance in grocery stores. And it's such a commonly used like food item that I can't even imagine it being in shortage. So yeah, I think like as Canadians and probably, in the UK too, we're very lucky that like in the middle of the winter we can eat exotic fruits and vegetables that were imported from all over the world, right?
Right.
Like I think my parents growing up didn't have that luxury. Like they didn't have avocados around in Eastern Europe, like 30 years ago. So yeah, it's just amazing how today like our food supply is just so connected globally. But yeah, I am really surprised at the shortage of tomatoes. In the UK because like, yeah, it's so commonly used in like different foods. And yeah, it's unfortunate that there's like bad weather conditions in North Africa. That's primarily the reason, right? Mm-hmm.
And there's, sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's such a good point that we have like a very, I guess, myopic focus on, the end, obviously. We're the end stage consumers of foods. And so I guess to address your question, if I walked into the grocery store and saw there were no tomatoes available, I don't think I would make the leap that there was a shortage in general. You know what I mean? I also think that in the past few years we've all grown so accustomed to not always being able to get everything that we need at the grocery store. So really starting at the beginning of the pandemic when things were selling out either because people were stockpiling or there were supply chain interruptions, I don't think anything's ever gotten back to, pre-pandemic levels of the way things were going with, logistics and supply chain. Particularly for grocery stores. And so I think it feels like, from a consumer perspective at least, seeing no tomatoes on a shelf, you might just think, oh, there's some issue there. I don't know that I would be, if I didn't work with you, Sydney, and we didn't work sort of within the food industry in the way that we do, I don't know that I would dig any deeper. I don't know that I would know that it was, a countrywide thing or a region-wide thing. I might just assume, my grocery store just like didn't get their shipment for whatever reason. Yeah, so I think that's like a really interesting thing we've talked about in the last couple of podcasts. As you said, we've talked about other shortages, the egg shortage and stuff. And this idea that I think the majority of consumers would not know why that particular product, wasn't available. And so I wonder if that begs the question, should we be doing something else to educate people? I know there are stories out there. Certainly we're producing those stories. Or do you think consumers will just say, well, I'm just not getting tomatoes for my grocery shop this week? I don't know.
Yeah, I really don't know, because we're so not used to, going into a grocery store and not seeing kind of everything, or at least we weren't before COVID. Like I never walked into a grocery store and didn't get everything I was looking for the most part. That might be, that's different maybe with other products, but with food, I feel like there was always everything was always in stock. So yeah, I mean, I really hope that people, I mean, for me personally, I think I appreciate it more, covering shortages. I appreciate the process more than I used to, just because I know that at any point we may not have access to something, usually temporarily, but I think it does make me a little more appreciative of what we do have, and all of the steps that thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people took to get that food on our shelves. It's just it's so much more mega and than we think about when we're just grocery shopping. So yeah, not to get all existential, but yeah, it really does make me grateful for the food that we do have and access to it here in Canada. Yeah, we're very lucky. So hopefully, though, that this tomato shortage does clear up and the weather does get better, because yeah, it affects a lot of people's livelihoods as well. It's not just it's not just us. It's their livelihoods, and what can they do about poor weather? Absolutely nothing. We just have to hope that it clears up and they're able to start growing things normally again.
I do wonder too, from the perspective of the grocery chains, what they do for their own image when a person walks into a grocery store and is not able to get everything on their list. Yeah. And as I said, maybe people are more used to it now, 3 years into having shortages here and there and supply chain disruptions. But I wonder if you walk in, you're not able to get, your tomatoes, and you think why can't this grocery store keep tomatoes in stock? I'm going to go to the next place. And maybe for this particular example, if it's, a UK-wide thing and you can't go anywhere and get tomatoes, or there's very few places, maybe you start to catch on as a consumer. But I wonder, with maybe some smaller scale supply chain issues or shortages, what that does to the brand reputation for these grocery chains, and whether they're losing shoppers that way to competitors, or whether it's really leveled the playing field in terms of, if there's a shortage for this store, there's a shortage across the board. And so it's, it's not really changing consumer perspectives that much. Just think that's another kind of level of this, another business, I guess, that's being affected.
That is an excellent point, because I feel like a lot of anger could potentially be, directed at, grocery stores or employees that don't deserve it at all. And I wonder, if employees of grocery stores gave the reasons, if consumers would be a little more sympathetic and understand this is not their fault, and hopefully consumers know going in that this is not the fault of anyone that works at the grocery stores. I would just hope that people would know that. But yeah, I think just knowing and understanding the reason, and just saying you're free to check other grocery stores, but this is a bit of a rampant problem for all of us. Yeah, if that would make a difference, because that's such a good point. I never think to ask if I can't find something, well, why don't you have it? But funny enough, I'm glad you brought this up, because it's a great segue into sort of our next story, which is, more broadly how companies can protect against cyber attacks. But I'll start off by just exemplifying a company that went through one recently, which was Dole. So Dole is a major American producer and distributor of fresh fruits and vegetables. I'm sure we've all seen Dole fruits, at the grocery store. And it recently confirmed that it experienced a food cyber attack that disrupted its operations. And the attack, which was identified as ransomware, forced the food giant to temporarily shut down production plants in North America and halt food shipments to grocery stores. Now, in a press release, Dole said, upon learning of this incident, Dole moved quickly to contain the threat and engaged leading third-party cybersecurity experts who have been working in partnership with Dole's internal teams to remediate the issue and secure systems. The company has notified law enforcement in the incident and are cooperating with their investigation. So although Dole mentioned that they contained the threat, grocery stores did actually witness the side effects of this cyber attack. So 2 grocery stores in Texas and New Mexico told CNN that they couldn't stock Dole salad kits on their shelves for days. And I reached out to Dole for further comment, but I have not heard back yet, and I do not predict that I will. But it is interesting how quickly these things can actually affect, grocery stores. And in the CNN article, they talked about the people that actually worked at these grocery stores and how it was affecting their businesses and whatnot. So feel free to check that out as well. But more broadly, if a multi-billion-dollar company like Dole can fall victim to a cybersecurity incident, are any companies actually immune from these cyber attacks? So I'll just talk about a little bit why food and beverage companies are targets for these type of attacks. So they've sort of become a preferred target of ransomware attackers. And if you don't know what ransomware attacks are, it's basically hackers refusing to unhack, just me in my layman terms here, just reverse the attack if they don't provide ransom. So this could be anywhere from it's usually in the millions of dollars. And another note about ransomware attacks too, just because if a company does choose to pay, doesn't mean that the attackers will actually stop either. So it's a good idea to really think hard if you're a major company that was hit with a cyber attack, whether you actually want to pay them, because it may not actually stop the attack in the end. But back to why food and beverage companies are targeted. So from chain restaurants and large producers to local farms and small businesses, virtually no company really is immune from network vulnerabilities that can be used to steal data, rendering networks unusable. And these attacks often lead to disruption of operations like it did with Dole and supply chain bottlenecks. And whether the attack party chooses to pay the ransom or not, targeted businesses suffer major losses trying to deal with the aftermath. And arguably the highest profile food cyber attack was a ransomware attack on meat producer JBS USA in 2021 that paralyzed the company's operations, and they ended up paying a ransom of $11 million. In addition to the JBS attack, Ferrera Candy, which is the largest candy corn manufacturer in the US, was also hit with a ransomware attack in 2021 before its critical Halloween season. And in March 2022, HP Hood Dairy, the Massachusetts-based producer of lactated milk products, responded to a ransomware attack by taking its plants offline, and it also disrupted supplies. So cybercriminals often assume that larger companies have the resources to pay ransom without a second thought, and smaller businesses often lack the necessary updates that are needed to fend them off. So for example, an Iowa-based farm services company called the New Cooperative Inc. was forced to take its systems offline to contain a security threat. And in 2021, private industry notification from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or the FBI, the agency stated that the infrastructure in the food and beverage industry has become a safer bet for cyber criminals, in part because the sector has adopted more smart technologies that open doors into their networks. And since the world's food supply chain relies on manufacturing facilities to keep their networks and equipment safe, here's a couple things that companies can do to mitigate the risks of a cybersecurity incident. So I was mentioning virtually no company is safe from being targeted by ransomware, regardless of the size or location. So food and beverage companies must take steps to manage risks effectively. And the FBI lists a number of precautions that businesses can take, including backing up data and protecting copies offline, protecting critical data by making it inaccessible to modification or deletion, installing software updates, prioritizing the creation and changing of passwords for all accounts, and disabling all unused remote access points and monitor used access. So these are just a couple of the things that food companies can do. Now, I actually also reached out to a company that specializes in food and beverage cybersecurity, and I asked them a couple of questions. The company is called Anzen Sage, and I reached out to the company just asking a couple of questions. And the first one was, how important is cybersecurity in the food and beverage industry? And these answers were provided by the CEO and founder of Anzen Sage, Kristen de Morinville. So she said, everyone prefers that healthy food is grown, manufactured, and distributed safely, and cybersecurity is critical to providing that confidence to consumers and stakeholders. The increased use of technology within the food industry has created additional attack surfaces, just like I mentioned. And still, and more importantly, the risks associated with people and process hasn't adapted fast enough to mitigate the risks effectively. My second question to her was, since a major corporation like Dole was recently attacked, are any companies immune from attack? And she said the most common cyber attack happens from a compromised third-party company into the parent company. And these integrated systems often are overlooked, do not have proper security controls, or aren't even thought about in terms of risk management, making them a prime target for bad actors or hackers. Many large food companies have subsidiaries under their umbrella. It's not a matter of when a cyber attack will happen. It's a matter of when a cyber attack will occur, not if anymore. And my last question was, what can companies do to prevent attacks, and how should they respond if they happen? And she said, a few quick suggestions to help prevent cyber attacks and be proactive. Hire a good security team that understands the specific security risks in the food industry. Educate your people on security risks within their particular roles, and create not only a good food security culture, but incorporate cybersecurity awareness within that program. If you believe you are being attacked, proper training of your employees will make the difference in the severity of the attack on your organization. Just as in a fire, stop, drop, and roll. In a cyber attack, stop, report, and mitigate. So it was really excellent to hear, her thoughts on this, since her company specializes in doing this. I really appreciated it. A couple other things that, companies can do if a cyber attack does happen. The first action should be to call in either internal or external IT experts to limit the damage as much as possible. So this can include steps like taking individual computers offline until the problem is dealt with, identifying and isolating the point of entry, and resorting to backup data when possible. So we've talked about, when the JBS attack did happen. I believe we talked about that. And even though these attacks seem like they don't happen very often, when they do, they're very high profile, and the ransom is often, in the millions. Truly no company is immune from these type of attacks. But yeah, I thought it was really interesting that, the food industry in particular is a target because of how much they've transitioned to sort of digital supply chains rather than, writing everything down. And a quick comparison that I'll make is that there's a big thing in like the hacking world called SIM swapping, which we all have SIM cards in our phone, and they're usually physical SIM cards. And often what hackers will do is they'll call service providers and claim to be a different person in order to sort of swap their SIM with the person whose data they're trying to access. And usually the weakest point of that whole train of like events is the person that they speak to. That's usually like the weakest link. And once you SIM swap, you can access somebody else's information. And what the latest Apple iPhone actually did was make an eSIM, so you don't need to have a physical one anymore. But I'm sure hackers, are going to figure out ways to SIM swap with these as well. Anyway, it just goes to show you that hackers really adapt to whatever new technologies are introduced to try and stop them, but they usually don't. So I think it's good for food companies to always have a plan of attack ready if cyber attacks do happen. But yeah, what do you guys make of Dole being the latest victim in a ransomware attack?
I mean, even if they didn't have to pay out the cyber criminal, right? In that, like how you mentioned a previous food company did, even if Dole didn't do that, they still must have suffered huge losses that they can't recover from like shutting down their operations in North America, right?
Right,
so,
right.
Yeah, there's a lot of consequences to being cyber attacked. Like, I mean, yeah, I honestly think it could happen to any food company.
And
really,
yeah, and with Dole and like JBS, for example, they're dealing with foods that need to be refrigerated for the most part. So you can imagine how much food could go to waste as a result of these attacks. And yeah, it trickles all throughout the supply chain, all the way back to the consumer when we're not seeing Dole salad kits anymore. I actually love those. So it kind of was like, oh shoot, like this is interesting. And it's another one of those things where it's like consumers would never really understand or think, oh yeah, I'm not seeing the Dole salad kits because Dole was recently had a ransomware attack. Like we don't make those connections, you know what I mean? And in this case, I also wonder what grocery store owners were telling people when they didn't see Dole products on the shelves, like and if they would even like understand or like appreciate like the like why that happened. Like it's very complex and complicated. Like I didn't know much about like cybersecurity before like writing about these major incidents, so I can't imagine that like the average consumer would kind of like put the pieces together.
Yeah, but I thought that was pretty neat how you found and you interviewed that expert, and they like specialize in like food and beverage industry cybersecurity. I didn't even know that was a thing to like specialize in.
I guess that's how big of an issue, where like, you know, they need preventative measures, right? And they need experts who, if this does happen, know exactly what to do and step in. And I guess every industry is a little bit different, right? Because all supply chains are different and have different needs. So I think it's awesome that there are cybersecurity firms that specialize in food and beverage industry protection, because it's clearly needed. And I think as they're becoming bigger targets, you know, the need and like the necessity for people that know the industry very well and know how to protect it is becoming equally important.
Yeah, Sydney, I think you made a good point as well about the difference between, you know, larger food companies and smaller food companies, and how, you know, the larger ones are more likely to have preventative measures in place, or at least mitigation measures, you know, when, not if, but when, as you said, a cyber attack happens, and are likely in a better position to be able to, I suppose, pay out a ransom if that's required. But I wonder, for these smaller producers that have been hit, you know, that feels very opportunistic on the part of hackers. And I'm sure they have to try and come up with, you know, how much ransom do we ask for, considering this is a smaller producer. I wonder how we get some of these cybersecurity tools in the hands of smaller producers, and, you know, make sure that they stay updated and that sort of thing. I'm sure that's like a huge challenge to kind of work that into their budget, and certainly a necessary challenge, but particularly in the food space, where margins can be pretty, you know, razor thin, and profits are not generally giant, especially if you're a smaller producer. I wonder how you get that to factor into the budget and make sure they're up to date. Because something like that is not a one and done. We all know with our, you know, even just our personal computers, we're always updating, you know, virus software and things like that. So certainly on an enterprise level, it's the same thing.
And I wonder, like, what... Yeah, like, why would hackers attack small companies? Is it for the data? Is it for money, even if they can't offer much? Like, I wonder why. And I think Kristen made a really good distinction, or she made a good point about like how larger companies get attacked, which is through you know, smaller like sister or brother companies or whatever, right, third-party companies that sneak their way into the parent company. I thought that was really, really interesting, because it seems crazy how any hacker can just like get into Dole's system. Like, this is a massive corporation. Same thing with JBS and a lot of the companies that are targeted. So they sort of make their way into the smaller companies, and yeah, that's quite interesting. I just don't, I don't really see why they would focus on small companies, and even though they may not, it's still, like you said, really important for them to be able to prevent attacks. And it might need to be something that people need to be trained on who are hired, it might be becoming like just a bigger thing within companies, like within internal IT rather than external. Like, it'll be interesting to see like what food companies start doing if they're just going outside, or if they're hiring internally for this kind of stuff. But it's beyond my comprehension, really, how hackers do it. I'll never understand, or I get why, but it's so unethical. I'd be really interested to speak to a hacker and sort of understand whether they felt any remorse about that kind of stuff, but probably not.
Yeah, I would think, probably not. And I bet this happens, much more than we hear about. Because in the case of like something like Dole, they're a publicly traded company, and so they have to release a statement about that, because they've got investors. But I'm sure there's, tons of companies that are not publicly traded, they're privately owned. And I would think you would, for the most part, want to keep this on the down low, particularly if they're able to kind of stop a hack, in its tracks at the beginning. And I'm sure there's plenty of attempts, happening all of the time, basically, to hack these food and beverage companies. Obviously, not all of them get through, thankfully, but yeah, this is likely a larger problem than any of us would really have been aware of as consumers in general.
And it's kind of like sad to me that people like kind of dedicate their time to hack, not just food companies, individuals, other companies, or like even there's a massive sort of industry. There's a massive issue in the music industry with like having people's like music leaked as well. Like there's so many layers to this, and people like dedicate their time to sort of like, ruin people's lives, and it's really sad, just for the pursuit of money or fame or whatever it is. But yeah, food isn't really something I would have thought would be such a major target of attacks like this, but it really is. But all the best to Dole. I hope they recover quickly, and they have preventative measures in the future. But on that note, I hope everyone enjoyed the 100th episode of the Xtalks Food Podcast. We'll see you in about 2 years when we reach the 200th food podcast. But if you like today's show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Thanks, everyone, and see you next week. Bye.
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 Thanks for listening to the Xtalks Food Industry Podcast. If you enjoyed our discussions today, please share the episode with your friends and colleagues, and be sure to subscribe in order to be notified when a new episode is released. To join in on the discussion, you can find Xtalks on social media, email podcast@xtalks.com, or comment on the articles directly. Links are in the show description. Take a moment to join our community at xtalks.com to get access to everything we have to offer, including webinars, job listings, virtual meetings, articles, and more. The views and opinions expressed in the podcast are those of the speakers sharing them. They should not be taken as professional advice and do not necessarily reflect the policy or position Honeycomb Worldwide. For further information, email us at podcast@xtalks.com. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.